guess it can only make like a
So if you know that it's 134A supposed to go in there, you recover the refrigerant out of there, and you put 134A back in. That's what you do.
Hello.
Put
it on YouTube?
Don't work.
I'll put my account on the board or whatever, and people can.
Oh, good idea.
Something else, there could be a multitude.
You're thoughtful, man.
Thanks. Yeah, that did.
Okay, so evaporating temperature. Okay, so we've discussed that we've got one pressure on the high side of the system and one pressure on the low side of the system, right? Okay. But one thing that you guys have probably not been exposed a whole lot to is long lengths of line set. Okay, so you haven't been exposed to when a line set is 20 or 30 feet long, or 40 or 50 feet long. What do you think happens in your lines as your lines get longer? Pressure drop. So as your pressure gets longer and you got pressure drop, when you put your gauge on the low side of the system at the compressor and you put your gauge on the low side of the system at the evaporator coil, they should be the same. But in reality, they're not. So how much pressure drop is acceptable between our compressor and our evaporator coil?
Per foot, isn't it?
Wow.
How much is acceptable in the field?
How about
Pound a foot? Boy, that'd be a lot over 30 feet. Wouldn't that be 30 pounds of drop? That's a lot of drop.
how about
What do we design for? We're going to go over line size, but does anybody
10%?
know what we size for?
is it 10%?
No, it doesn't depend on the system. We size for the system.
There, I don't know how to read it, though.
Huh?
I don't know how to read that.
It's not on there.
It tells you the pressure drop.
Settings, it don't tell you what the pressure drop is in the line setting. 2 pounds.
Oh wow.
We size for 2 pounds of pressure drop between our compressor and our evaporator coil. This is what we size for. So our line set should have no more than 2 pounds of drop. But let's get in the real world. Okay? In the real world, does every system out there have 2 pounds of drop? No. I've seen them as much as 10, 20 pounds of drop. So when you're checking your evaporating temperature, or you're checking total low side superheat, which one do you go by?
Well, what are you doing?
So if I got
Evaporator?
If I got an evaporator coil hanging here, and my compressor is over here, and I got a suction line running between here and here, and let's say it's 50 feet between point A and point B, and I want to check superheat on my evaporator coil. Where do I take my pressure reading at? Do I take it at my compressor, or do I take it at my evaporator coil, or do I take it in the middle? Or do I take it anywhere in between there?
For what?
I mean, if you have a tap at your evaporator coil, that'd be awesome.
You take it at the evaporator coil. That's exactly right. So if you've got a thermostatic expansion valve at your evaporator coil, it's an external equalized line, then what you can do is you can pull the external equalized line off and put a tap right at your evaporator coil and check the evaporator superheat. Check get your true evaporating temperature right here. Okay? If you're checking total low side superheat at your compressor, if you're checking total low side superheat, what evaporating temperature do you use in order to check your total low side superheat?
At the compressor.
We check the compressor, or do we check the evaporator coil?
For the total low side.
For your total low side superheat.
Oh no, you'd still have to go at the evaporator for sure. Sorry.
We still need evaporating temperature, so
Yeah.
you're still going to check it at the evaporator coil. You're still going to check it at the evaporator coil. Now, your compressor pressure is going to be less than your evaporator coil because your compressor's sucking. If your compressor's sucking and you've got a lot of pressure drop in that line, this pressure over here is going to be less than over here. So you're going to show more evaporator superheat. If this pressure is less, you're going to show more superheat than if you check it over here. But you always use your tap closer to your evaporator coil because that is your true evaporating temperature. That's your true evaporating temperature, whatever your pressure is in the coil. Remember them internal and external equalized lines that we went over when we got to the distributors? We're going to go over the distributors again, too. You always check it at your evaporator coil, no matter how long your line set is.
What is it, Bob? say, 50 pounds?
Yeah, 50
50
feet, no matter how long your line set is, you always check your evaporating temperature at the pressure drop, at the pressure tap on your evaporator coil is where you always check it at.
Total low side as well.
Total low side as well. Because that is true evaporating temperature, whatever your evaporator coil is. Whatever your evaporator coil is. And in refrigeration, we run into this a lot in refrigeration. In piping arrangements.
But taking the equalized line off there, you're not gonna change your TXV? No?
Because you're just checking the pressure. Inside of
2
it.
seconds, it ain't gonna make a difference.
Well, you're not taking the line off. You're putting a T on the.
Oh, you put a T in.
You put a T on there, yeah. No, you can't disconnect the line and leave the line disconnected, no. You can't do that. You
just put a
physically,
T in, okay.
you physically gotta put a T in there and then screw your gauge on the top of the T.
So in other words, if you don't take your reading closer to the evaporator, you don't cut the suction temperature and the evaporator temperature are different, correct?
Yeah, suction line temperature is suction line temperature. And evaporating temperature is evaporating.
Yeah, but-
Suction line temperature is the temperature of the suction line. And evaporating temperature is the temperature at which your refrigerant is blowing at inside of the evaporator coil.
Yeah, but here in the handout, it says the evaporator temperature is the same as the suction temperature, and the pressure is taken close to the evaporator.
Yeah, as long as you don't have a lot of pressure drop in the line.
So they are the same thing.
What was the question again?
In the handout you provide, it says the evaporator temperature is the same as the suction temperature when the pressure is taken close to the evaporator. So
But that's not suction line temperature. That's evaporating temperature. Both of those things, what it's referring to there is the evaporator temperature. That's not suction line temperature, that's
It's
evaporating
brought to
temperature.
you by
why
National.
do you call it suction temperature?
Because some people refer to it as suction temperature. Okay? If you get out in the field and you start talking to people out in the field, some people refer to evaporating temperature as suction temperature. Okay? It's got to say suction line temperature in order to be the line temperature. Okay, so our low side gauge is an R22 system. If we're at 69 pounds, we're going to be reading 40 degrees evaporating temperature. So if we are taking that pressure here at the evaporator coil, that's going to be 40-degree evaporator coil. Now, if we take that same pressure reading here, close to the compressor, this pressure here may be low, close to the evaporator coil. Like I said, I've seen as much as 10 or 20 pounds of drop in that suction line between your evaporator coil and your compressor. You always want to take your evaporating temperature as close to the evaporator coil as you can get it, because that's going to give you true evaporating temperature is what that's going to give you. And that's a little bit different because you guys haven't really been, we don't really talk about that in the previous semesters. They leave that up to me to talk about that line set run, because in refrigeration, you run into that a lot. In air conditioning, you typically don't see that a lot in air conditioning. But in refrigeration, we do run into that a lot. Normally, when you're dealing residential, you're dealing with a maximum of 20 or 25 feet in your line set, and it's going to be the same at your evaporator coil and out at your unit, as long as you're doing your piping arrangement right. As long as you're deburring your lines and not putting a lot of 90s in there. But in commercial, we do a lot of hard piping. We do a lot of 90s. If you've got a line set run that looks like, if you've got a line set run that's all hard piped, and it looks like this. You got all the 90s in there. And these are all short radius 90s here. You're going to have a lot of pressure drop in that line. If you got a lot of pressure drop and you take a pressure reading here, you might have 69 psig here. But when you get all the way back over here to the compressor, you might have 49 pounds over at the compressor. So you've got to really pay attention to this. If you're working, anything, if you're working residential, you're working commercial, you're working refrigeration, you're working air conditioning, you got to pay attention to this, because if you take this pressure reading over here at the compressor, and you're thinking it's 49 pounds over here, and you got an R22 system, that's going to put you at like a 24-degree evaporating temperature. In reality, you take it over here and you got 69, that's going to put you at 40 degrees evaporator, so that's 9 degrees difference on your evaporating temperature there. So that's a lot of superheat in your coil, if you're looking at those parameters there. Yes, sir.
Would you have that if you didn't have the 90s, though, if it was just like you used a tube bender?
It all depends on how many bends you got, how long it is.
About a pound and a half.
So a tube bender if it was like that, or if you
Is that
used
68?
Well, 90s are going to be more restrictive than a tube
22.
bender. By all means, whenever you can use a bender, use a bender. But we don't use, There's a lot of people that use benders out in the field, there's a lot of people that use 90s out in the field. It's cheaper to use a bender, it's also more time
I
consuming.
think it's saying on air conditioning.
Okay, so,
High
you know, this is kind of a trade-off. You're gonna see a lot of 90s, but you gotta take this into consideration. And normally, everybody overlooks this until guess what happens? What's gonna be the end result if you got a lot of pressure drop in this line?
Oil return problems.
You're gonna have oil return problems. So guess what you're gonna have? Guess what the end result here is gonna be?
Bad compressor.
Compressor, Mr. Black Compressor here isn't gonna be working when you show up at the job site. That's the end result. And then you gotta figure out why. So then you put another compressor in there, and it fails in 2 or 3 months or 6 months or a year. So that's the end result, is Mr. Compressor gives up the ghost.
I have a
Well, you say, sometimes the mindset is
yeah, we did. Oh, what are
but
they?
I've seen some houses
What are the questions?
that
Do we have
have
TD on a no fan. Yeah,
That's
sure.
the 2 pound
no fan?
pressure drop still would apply there.
Like in every commercial, every piping arrangement, you're allowed 2 pounds of drop in every piping arrangement. That's what you're allowed. From evaporator coil to compressor, we size for 2 pounds. What we size for.
So basically the drop is it due to the ambient temperature?
No, it has to do with how much pressure you start with and how much pressure you end up with. So in this line here, if I read 49 pounds here, and I got 69 pounds here, that means I got 20 pounds of drop between my evaporator coil and my compressor right here.
And that is unacceptable. You only
So it
do
shouldn't be
2
lower than 67.
2 pounds, yeah. So if you have 69 here, you should have 67 at your compressor. That's what acceptable is. 2 pounds.
What do you do if it is?
Repipe it. It's either undersized suction line, or you got way too many 90s in it, or you got too much vertical rise in it. You got to repipe it. There's no other way around it. There's no way to fix it.
Could you take off insulation?
That's not going to change the pressure drop.
That's
just going to take. That's just going to take.
Really?
It's going to take. That's just going to cause your gas temperature to go up. Is all.
So if you cause your gas temperature to go up, aren't you by definition causing your gas pressure to go up? That was the core of my question, I guess.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily? The pressure of a gas isn't directly related to temperature? Or?
It is, but
Right.
it is your gas. Your pressure is directly related to temperature. Okay, but if you pull the insulation off of here, you're going to be raising the gas temperature.
Right.
But you're not necessarily going to be raising the pressure. Yeah, technically, yes, you're going to be raising the pressure a little bit, but you're not going to be raising it a lot. Right? If you pull the insulation off of here, you're going to be picking up more sensible heat in your refrigerant here, but you're not going to be gaining a whole lot of pressure. If it makes sense. It don't. It don't. You would think by pulling the insulation off, you warm the suction line up, you warm the suction gas temperature up, right? You'd be increasing the pressure tenfold. It don't work like that. It doesn't. All you're doing is superheating the gas before it goes back to the compressor. You're increasing the superheat, so you're increasing the discharge line temperature is all you're doing. So you're going to make the compressor
Work harder for no reason? Yeah.
go up and make your compressor go out twice as fast.
That's fair.
I've had to pull suction lines. I've had to pull suction line insulations off on freezers before. And you've got a close coupled system, and you're running 6 to 8 degrees superheat on your evaporator coil, and you're trying to get 20 back to your compressor, and you can't get 20 back to your compressor. So the only way you can do it is either increase your superheat on your coil, or you pull a little insulation off the suction line. Now that's not condoned out in the field, but you got a 30-year-old piece of equipment, and you keep taking compressors off, and the customer insists you get it fixed. You kind of do whatever you think is going to work. Well, I had to do that before, but you don't typically try to do stuff like that. Okay, so how evaporator coils absorb heat? They absorb heat through latent heat process. And that latent heat causes those refrigerant droplets to boil. And then after we get that refrigerant all saturated with that latent heat, we are still absorbing heat into the evaporator coil, and we're completely boiled off into vapor. Then we can add sensible heat to it, and then as we add that sensible heat, we increase the temperature of the vapor, so we are superheating the vapor above the saturation temperature. That's called superheat. So evaporator superheat is suction line temperature minus the evaporating temperature at the outlet of the evaporator coil. So if you got a thermostatic expansion valve, and you got a bulb on the suction line, where do you want to take your suction line temperature at? Closest to the evaporator. So do we want to be on the downstream side of the bulb, or do we want to be on the upstream side of the bulb?
I don't understand.
So do we want to be between the bulb and the evaporator, or do we want to be between the bulb and the compressor? Bulb and the evaporator coil. That would be on the upstream side of the bulb. Because the refrigerant is being sucked back to the compressor, that would be the downstream side. Okay? So whenever you take an evaporator superheat, you want to be between the bulb and the evaporator coil is where you want to be. Okay, so if we've got a thermostatic expansion valve on here, we got a bulb coming off of here, and our bulb is down here on our suction line like that. We want to take our thermometer reading right here between the bulb and the outlet of our evaporator coil. So in this example right here, how much coil superheat do I have? 10 degrees of evaporator superheat. And how much total low side superheat do I have? 20. 20 total low side superheat. So if we take our suction line temperature, which is 60, minus our evaporating temperature, which is 40, which we get from 69 from an R22 unit, converted to temperature, which is 40 degrees, gives us 40 degree evaporating temperature. If we take this temperature minus this temperature, it gives us 20 degrees. If we take this temperature right here, the suction line temperature, the outlet of the evaporator coil, minus our evaporating temperature, it gives us 10 degrees of coil superheat. So on a medium temperature case, would that be a good running system? Yes, it would be a good running system on a medium temperature case. Now on a low temperature case, would that be a good running system?
No.
No. No. Not. On a low temperature case. Alright, TD. Hey, we've talked a little bit about TDs, haven't we? And what do we say our normal TD was?
For what application?
For every application. I said 10 to what?
20.
10 to 20. Okay, so 10 to 20 degrees TD in all your applications. Okay, so depending on what application you're going to have is going to depend on what TD you're going to be running.
Here's what I ask her.
What I found is this is somewhat true, about 80% of the time, but
Every
the other
time.
20% of the time it doesn't hold true. But what I have found out in the field is I have found everything runs 10 to 20. You very seldom have less than 10, and you very seldom have more than 20 on a normal running case. Okay? But on a reach-in, on a reach-in cooler, or a reach-in freezer, we always run more TD on a reach-in than we do on a walk-in. And we always run more TD on an air conditioner than we do on a reach-in. Does anybody know why? Anybody done any reading in their book and deciphered this yet? Why do we have more TD on air conditioning or reach-ins than we do in walk-ins?
BTUs are higher.
Say that again.
Why do we have more TD on air conditioning and reach-ins than we do on walk-ins?
Because the door.
The ambient air, the humidity in the ambient air.
Because of the ambient air. What does it have to do with the ambient air? What's in the ambient air?
Latent heat.
Humidity.
Gets in.
That's what it has to do with. It has to do with humidity. In a reach-in, we hold more humidity in a reach-in
Good
than we
point.
do in a walk-in. Anytime that you got something that you're using for cold storage, you typically hold less humidity in it than you do for a merchandiser. And normally reach-ins are merchandisers. You're constantly getting in them. So if you're constantly getting in them, you got more air filtration on it inside of them. So depending on your product that you have inside your box, a lot of time you're going to run different humidity levels. And a forest case is a good example of this. In a forest case, do you think that you would run more humidity in a forest case than you would in a beer cooler?
Yes.
Yeah, you would. Because flowers need humidity. So if you're working on a forest case, you might be running more TD than you would be on a beer cooler. So your suction pressure is going to be different. I've seen as much as 35, 40 degrees on a forest cooler before. And I've seen as little as 10 8 degrees on a beer or soda walk-in. So, depending on what product you got inside your case is going to depend on your TD also. Yes, sir.
Ran into a situation yesterday, 2 days ago, something like that, and we were wondering where to set the TD on a meat case that has like a flooded coil type, no evaporator fans. Just
So static evaporator.
exactly.
Okay.
So where do TD ranges fall in on that type of equipment?
Well, it depends on the manufacturer. There you're going to be in your 10 to 20 degree TD range again. I would think on something like that, you would want the TD up on it a little bit higher.
Right.
So you would want, we really can't dictate what the TD is on the case. The manufacturer is going to dictate that on the amount, on how big the evaporator coil is, and how big the evaporator coil is versus our case. And the only thing we're going to have control over is the superheat inside the case. That's all we're going to have control over. The superheat on the coil is all we're going to have control over. So I would still set that for 8 to 12 degree superheat on my coil and see what my TD is. And then if you want to play around with it a little bit because you don't think the TD's quite right, maybe you want a little more TD in it, then you can, if you want a little more TD in it, then you could run a little less superheat, which is going to get you a little bit more coil TD on it. So you can play around with that just a little bit, but you got to be, you got to be careful with that too, because if you run the superheat too low on it,